Ari, and I'll be your host today as always. Now, today we've got a really cool topic. We're going to be talking about gaining independence from tech giants. So Peter Abrahamson from AtomJump is here with us today, and this is going to be exciting stuff because they're all about transparency in their business. And he's going to talk to us about how to get away from these tech giants so that if something was to go down in the rest of the world and we're here in NZ, we're not affected. So that's a really cool notion or application or thing to apply to your business or to look at applying, and we can investigate that a little bit further in this session. There's lots of cool links that you're going to get so you can do your own due diligence to see if it works for you. Now, we are streaming live on a number of platforms. So depending on what platform you're joining us on, you can communicate with us throughout the session using the Q&A function, the chat function, the comments section. Feel free to drop your questions in. That's why Peter's here. And we will endeavor to answer those questions throughout the session, at the end of the session. And yeah, so let's do this. Ask your questions, get them out there. And by the way, if you're not registered for Digital Boost and you stream with us every day on some of these other platforms, you're missing out because we do have competitions and special offers. I know I keep saying it, and I'm going to keep on doing that because really there's so much more on the site and you will really love it and have a great learning journey. And I don't want you to miss out on any of that goodness. Thanks, Peter, for joining us today.
Hi, Anne-Marie.
Hi.
Hi.
So I had the pleasure of interviewing you a while back because you not only are one of the founders, I guess, of AtomJump, but you also have another business called MedImage, which helps doctors around NZ and stuff to be able to take pictures of things happening with their patients and transferring it safely into the patient files. And that's a really cool app for people to use. And so I had the chance to interview you for a fireside chat. And now here we are to talk about your other business, AtomJump. But really, we're going to get into how to gain independence from the tech giants. So this is going to be super cool. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop my video now, and I'm just going to check on the back end that everything's running on all the different platforms. And I'll let you kind of tell everybody a little bit about yourself and then move into this topic.
Great. Thanks, Anne-Marie. Yeah, so we've, I guess, come to this as we have a medical business. We develop the apps and that's fine. But we have another side to us, which is a foundation, and we're a non-profit, and we're basically trying to be an alternative to Facebook. It's a non-profit alternative. So we're all open source, and now, if you're not familiar with what open source is, that's a very transparent way of all of the internals of the system are publicly released so that you can change it around and modify it to suit your needs and so forth. Now, I guess the topic which we're talking about today came about because of an event which happened online a couple of months ago. In fact, there were two of them, and it really highlighted a pretty major issue that we have with our global web infrastructure at the moment. And what happened was they're called a content delivery network. There was a configuration problem in the United States, and that single configuration issue took down pretty much every major website around the world for about one or 2 hours. Now, this this is obviously pretty concerning for all of those businesses involved. And then, I mean, the big names involved. BBC went down. Here in New Zealand, Trade Me went down. Amazon went down. Google went down. And so forth. And so pretty much nobody was exempt from this of all of the main websites out there. Now, if you don't use a content development network, CDN as they're called, and a lot of the smaller sites don't, then it wouldn't have affected you. So today we're going to talk about ways that we can try to isolate ourselves from these risks, which are potentially can affect all of us. I guess if we look to begin with, what is actually causing this is that a number of companies have started to use what are called APIs, or application programmer interfaces. And so that the single points of contact around the internet, around the web, where you become dependent on that particular service operating. So what happened here was one of these delivery networks went down. There was a configuration problem, but so many other organizations around the world were dependent on that particular router, as it was, operating correctly. Now, if it doesn't, and all of those dependent companies will go down as well, and all of the follow-on companies below them who depend on them, for example, Google Maps would have been down. Every other website which depends on Google Maps would also, the maps would have stopped as well. So it causes this carry-on sort of trickling down effect. And it's basically caused by dependence on very much single points of contact. Now, to avoid this problem, there are a number of ways to isolate yourself from it. And if you look back at the origins of the internet, the original design was to be able to mitigate. So it would, even with a nuclear bomb blast in a particular place, you would be able to, the network would still flow around the issue. So there would always be some sort of backup route where data could flow through. Now, back in 1990 or thereabouts, when the web came into being, it was fine, but we were basically becoming independent of, we could set up our own server and everybody could suddenly see that server on the internet, and we could see the content on that server. Now, that was fine. So we all had our own independent servers and we were pretty much independent entities. But what started to happen from there was that these websites became popular, the content on them became popular, and they started to have set up databases where, and those databases would serve up that content, and all of that, what was once independent, the independence that we had, merged into becoming dependent on that particular one web server operating. Now, this is, I guess, a difficulty as we've moved forward. The main websites which we now sort of use, such as Facebook or Amazon or Google, and we depend on them operating, they've started to collect everybody into their different services, and they've become huge entities, huge corporate money-making entities. And so one way is, but what we'll find is, because they're still single points of failure effectively, and while those companies can do quite a lot to make sure those services keep operating, and they can set up different server farms in different countries around the world and so forth, there is always still that one single point of control for those companies and what serves up that information. So, for example, if you have Facebook, now if there's a configuration problem with Facebook itself, that configuration is still that central point. So even though there are different servers operating around the world which can serve up that content, if that configuration is misconfigured, and we've seen this a number of times, then large chunks of that whole system will suddenly go offline. Now, these companies do the best that they can, and they'll work rapidly to try and correct this problem. But the question, I guess, as a New Zealand business owner is, do we want to become dependent on those services? And there are only a few of them around the world, which some of them are slightly more hidden than the very visible ones like Facebook and Google. But if we become dependent on them in our own business space, then if those services go down, we're at the behest of really their service. Now, I guess when we start to think about independence, we can look back to an example in our own lives where our parents want us to be independent. You know, we grow up, and the thing that our parents want to see the most is us being us standing on our own 2 feet. And so we go out and we find work, and we start to earn an income. And then we, I guess, as business owners now, we started to think when we were in those jobs, but hang on, what happens if my boss doesn't like my work or what have you? And so we stepped away from our business, from our company, the corporate structure of that, and we tried to set up our own business. Now, that business, we really want independence. That's why we're doing it. We want to have more financial freedom, more financial independence from any one single entity, so that we've got customers from a number of different places. So when we, I guess, as we go through that journey, then if we step away and we set up our own business, but we set up our digital existence of that business on a service such as Facebook groups or Wix website builder, or one of these kinds of services, then effectively we're giving that, we're shifting our boss, if you like. So it was within our corporate job, but our boss is now sitting in America running our service, because if that service goes down, then our whole business stops working. So we have to try and isolate our business function, the functions of our business from the critical operations of that business from the services that we use. Now, ways that we can actually do this and include setting up, using open source alternatives. Now, open source means, as I mentioned before, the software is available. We can reuse it and we can push it onto our own servers if we want to, if we have that technical capability. So that there's always that backup plan. But now we can still use the simple online services, such as WordPress.com, for example. But we've always got that backup plan with the open source options, where we can download the software from WordPress.org and we can set up on our own server if WordPress.com failed. Now, the failure of these big services can happen at a very short notice. And we saw just today on the news, New York City was inundated by a hurricane. Now, that can, any sort of event like that could potentially disrupt the entire network. It was, I think it was a server in New York, or a router in New York, which went down a couple of months ago. Now, if that was caught out in the flood, for example, it could be weeks or even months before that router is fixed up again. So to mitigate ourselves from the risk of being involved in that sort of outage, it's best to find some sort of backup plan. So I'm not against here using some of these online services, and some of them are very convenient for business, and some of them are very good products. But it's more about finding that comfort level, having that backup plan, and being able to put it into action rapidly if you need to. So now I have a couple of alternatives that we use ourselves here in the AtomJump Foundation. And I think Anne-Marie, you've probably got a list of these now as well.
Yeah, I do. So I've got all the links pulled up there, but we'll kind of go through them one at a time. You go through them, and this is so interesting, and I'll start popping them in the chats and functions everywhere. So if you've got questions, guys, feel free to pop them in, and Peter, be happy to answer them.
So we started out using Google Docs and Gmail, and they're very good products. I still think they're probably the best of breed, if you like, perhaps with Microsoft being up there as well. But we wanted to find an alternative so that we weren't dependent on Google. And so we looked around a little bit, and we found some open source alternatives, and one of them was called Collabra. And Collabra, combined with another open source package called Nextcloud, turned out to be quite a good option. I wouldn't say it's as quick as Google Docs, but it does the job, and it's a good sort of backup plan. So Anne-Marie's put a link through to Nextcloud. Now, we also looked at Gmail, and we're looking around for open source alternatives to that. Now each of these open source alternatives, you have the choice of using a hosted version, typically with the people who developed it. And that hosting prices are quite reasonable. They're usually slightly less than the pure commercial options. But you always have that option of downloading the software as well and setting up your own server, or getting a local web developer to do that. So with Gmail, we looked at Tuanota, and we've got Collabra Office up there. Yep.
Is that right? Collabra Office?
Yeah, I think that probably is the link to it. Yeah. Now, Tuanota is a German firm, or a German open source product, and we found a pretty, it's quite, I'd say it's perhaps even slightly more security conscious than Gmail even. And I'd say it's probably a comparable product to Gmail. Maybe not quite as quick to operate, and there's a few things about the interface which I would still prefer Gmail than Tuanota, but they're very close to it, and for us it's been a good replacement. So yeah, we're pretty happy. We've been working with Tuanota now for about a year, I'd say, and I don't think we'd go back. Knowing what we know now about having that secondary backup plan. Now the next link. So Facebook groups. This is where we have a slight bias. There are other options around, but this is something that we've been working on at the foundation. We have an alternative to Facebook groups, so you can set up a page and on AtomJump, or you can set up your own server and you can run your own messaging software basically, and you can change how that messaging system is put together. So there are some other options in the messaging space which are open source as well, but we're one of them. Now Zoom, Zoom's become a very popular product for video conferencing, and we're on it right now. We looked around just a few years back for alternatives, well, basically to be able to integrate video conferencing in with our messaging tool. And we came across Jitsi, J-I-T-S-I, and Jitsi has, they've been set up since I think early 2000s. So they've been around for quite a while, and we just found their video conferencing quite a mature system. It runs directly inside your browser, so you don't have to download any software, unlike Zoom. And we can introduce, I think up to about 70 people, a bit like a Zoom call. You can have quite a few people on the screen at once. And on a mobile phone, you do have to download an app, but it's a free app and it's all open source. So Jitsi was a great alternative to Zoom, and we've integrated it in with our product as well. And moving on, so there was a TeamViewer is another commercial product which a lot of people use for logging into remote machines and providing support for their customers. And with that, we've looked around quite a lot over the years, and we still hadn't found a good alternative, an open source alternative. But fairly recently, we found a product called Meshcentral, and that was it looked quite technical, which was why we hadn't really experimented with it very much. But once we actually set it up on one of our servers, it means that our costs go down to zero because it's running off our server. And TeamViewer is quite expensive. It's something like $600 or $700 a year per user. So Meshcentral has allowed us to expand our support operations, so we can have dozens of people working on it without those big expenses. And as a non-profit, we don't have the finances to really fund TeamViewer licenses for everybody. It's perhaps not quite as immediate. There is a little bit more set up at the other end for the user, but it is a good alternative. Right, so another one, Xero. Now this is a little bit controversial because Xero is a New Zealand-based company, and I have a lot of respect for the product, and we still use Xero. But it is nonetheless a service, and they don't have an open source alternative. It's a service, and if that service goes down, or if you have some issue with your license with Xero or what have you, then you may be cut off. And if you don't have a way of taking on invoices from customers, then potentially you won't even be able to pay back Xero, for example, if you're struggling to pay Xero, if you're that tight on your cash flow. So Invoice Ninja was a product which I've come across and I've experimented with a little bit. We haven't brought it live, and I don't think we will at this stage. It doesn't have New Zealand-based integrations, so it won't have integration with the tax department, for example, which makes Xero quite friendly for New Zealand businesses. But the actual product itself looked like it worked very well. And so as a sort of a secondary backup option, we've kept Invoice Ninja on the back burner, but it is there. Now, the other product I mentioned before was Wix. And Wix is, I'm sure, used by quite a few of people watching this. It's a good product. It lets you quickly build a website and tailor it and put your own copy onto it, and has very good templates and so forth. And the only downside I would say to that is that because there's no open source alternative to it, it is just a service, a single point of failure service. If that goes down, then your business will go down as well. And you don't necessarily have much say in how the Wix company can, you might ask for them to make sure their service continues to operate in certain things, but they're large corporates, so you can't really tell them to change any of the software so easily. Whereas in the alternative to that, I guess, is WordPress. And WordPress.com, which a lot of people probably use, and you may be more familiar with, is quite similar to Wix. But WordPress.org is the software version of Wix, or of WordPress rather. So you can download that, and you can get a local web developer to put that onto your server. So I think that's probably the main ones which I wanted to go through today. So at this stage, I guess a couple more points. generally speaking, now when we host if we go for our own website, and a lot of you have your own websites, there are a couple of things that we can do to try to prevent us from being dependent on other services remotely. And sometimes we might have to ask a technical person, like our web developer, to make those changes. But one of them is to reduce or remove any remote API calls. Now, that is something which we had to go through a particular process to actually go down all of our code and say, actually, let's get rid of that, make sure that's running locally on our own service rather than depending on a remote system. The web developers will know what that means, and you just have to remind them about it. And generally, we can buy New Zealand made as well. We can host our websites on New Zealand hosting services. Now, if we choose, and they are very good products, the Google Cloud, the Amazon Cloud, AWS, and the Microsoft Cloud, Azure, they are good products, I don't doubt that, but we are partly dependent on that whole corporate structure over in America. And if there is some sort of disconnection which occurs between New Zealand and America, all of our systems will go down. And so New Zealand-made system, that just means that we'll still be able to continue operation independently of the United States, and some sort of issue like the flooding which occurred today in New York. I think that probably covers the main points I wanted to get across today. So are there any questions at this point?
Yes. So I've been popping those in the chat. Now somebody said that it wasn't allowing them to just select those items and kind of click through. I'm not sure why. It should let you just click on the links and they should open, but maybe not copy paste. But alternatively, if it's not letting you do that, if you are on LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube, you can also find those links. I've popped them all in the chats there, or the comment section, and I will make, so you should be able to get them there. Now, there was a question from Warren that says, any suggestion for hosting providers?
So I just mentioned New Zealand-based options. We did try some New Zealand options, and I think Umbrella was one of them. Eventually, we decided that they weren't quite as, I think technically they weren't quite as fast as some of the American options. The American systems are well designed, they have mass volume, so they've become quite fine-tuned. We went and built our own service. Now, this is probably out of the scope of what most New Zealand businesses can do, but we put together physical hardware, Raspberry Pi little servers, which I mentioned to last talk we had. So yeah, there are a few New Zealand options, but have a look around on the web. I can't necessarily recommend any particular service at this point, but it is worth looking around, and they may have improved since when we tried, which was a couple of years back.
Is it raspberrypi.org?
Yeah, so raspberrypi.org. You don't have to use Raspberry Pi servers. We use them because they're small and flexible, and they're good at surviving earthquakes and things like that. So there were some advantages, and they're cost effective, and we can grid them together in large grids as well. But yeah, you can go with more traditional servers if you are doing your own server. I'm trying to think of what New Zealand servers there are. If you are looking for that information, maybe contact our support team and they'll do a little bit of investigatory work. Yeah, I'm happy to read through and have a read around as well and get some links back to people later on. Yeah, fantastic. I'm just trying to get this to load. Oh, I may have frozen on LinkedIn. Nope, we're okay. Hold on one sec. Sorry, there is another question. Just lots of links everywhere. Okay, so hi Peter, how about Cloudflare, Flare, sorry, Flare,
Is it a CDN?
My understanding is it's CDN. So
what does that mean? I don't know what a CDN is.
Yeah, so the CDNs came about because basically once a single server gets so much traffic on it, so let's say a server becomes very popular, and that's one physical server sitting somewhere in the world. If a lot of people suddenly start to look at that server, suddenly there's some post about it or what have you, and there's a sudden rush of traffic to that one server, and it overflows the amount that that server can actually handle. And so the initial thing that people did with the websites when the services were getting big was they created what's called a cluster. So this cluster, which is what I was talking about before with the Raspberry Pis, the clusters divide up the workload between these different servers. Now that's fine to a point, and your cluster can get maybe, let's say, up to 30 different machines or so. And so you're dividing up that workload between 30 different hardware machines. But what then happens if it becomes more than that? So a company like TradeMe, for example, which has a lot of traffic and a lot of photographs in particular. Now, they are spreading the load even further with these CDNs. So CDNs that are an organization, and they will say, okay, we'll put your content up onto our network around the world. We'll have servers. We've already built server farms, based globally, and we'll put them up onto a server everywhere on all of these different services. And so no matter where you are in the world, you can reference quite quickly, because it's usually a local download, one of those pieces of content. So it's a way of spreading it out so that a large number of people can see that content. And it works very well, I'd say, with static files. Static meaning it's constant, it doesn't change. So a photograph, for example, doesn't change, it isn't built to change. And so these CDNs will serve up those photographs around the world to large volumes of people. Now the difficulty, of course, and I think Cloudflare would have the same issue, is that they have that single point of failure. So if that single point of failure fails, then suddenly everything else, all of the networks which depend on them, go down as well. And so while it's not necessarily a bad thing, CDN in theory is quite a good thing, and it makes it possible for us to have very fast internet connections to websites and so forth. We just don't want to become dependent on that service. So use these services when we can, but don't rely on it. Don't have your core infrastructure for your business dependent on it. Answer the question?
Yeah, this is so interesting. I'm actually just jumping around. Hold on. I'm just making sure I haven't missed any questions, because I've put so much in the chat. I can't see what other people are doing. Where are we going? Oh, I lost one of my platforms there. But I think actually we there as well. Great, thanks, Mike. Yeah, we don't have any more questions. Those are any other, I guess, like as a like a little question that I would throw out there, like if you were a small business, maybe you weren't like super techy, what would be like, where would you start? Because it seems like there's quite a few things that you're kind of offering here, or your options you're giving.
Yeah, I mean, so I would probably try to spread my risk, and if you were to go with an option like Wix, if you were building a website, always make sure you've got some sort of backup plan, so you can copy, even if it's as simple as copying and pasting all the text that you've written onto Wix's website. So you have a text version of the site, and you could put that onto a different website, for example, and just put the plain text on there, so that even if that main visual front end of your website were to go down, you still have some means for your potential customers to keep contacting you, or your operations to continue. So yeah, I mean, you can go with services such as Facebook as well, and but I wouldn't build all of your dependence on Facebook, for example. And yeah, if you're giving out as you're linked to, on your publicity, for example, your Facebook page, or and you only have your Facebook page and you don't have a website address, then you're pretty restricted if Facebook is down. So yeah, to try to spread that risk and sure, have something on Facebook, but also have a website, and also have something on LinkedIn or what have you.
Do you have any suggestions for CRMs?
Yeah, so there are different systems. WordPress, it would be known as one of the CRMs. So it's basically the CRM is a content management
Customer relationship.
CMS, yeah. But customer relationship manager is what we're really talking about. Sorry, CRM. So we built our own CRM, and we built that with our messaging. So we log and track everything internally using our own messaging tool. So that's AtomJump messaging. But we also use spreadsheets and typically online spreadsheets, and we did that with the Google Docs, Nextcloud, Collabra. You can use, there are a number of different products. I can't think of any off the top of my head, which are open source CRMs as well.
Yeah, maybe we'll have a look into that. We'll have a look at some open source CRMs, because yeah, I don't know any off the top of my head. Like, I know a bunch of CRMs, but I don't know any open source that, well, I don't know if they are open source, I guess. How about having 2 copies of a website on 2 different servers to ensure continuity?
Yeah, so that's definitely a good plan. And you can do that at multiple levels. You can do that at what's called the DNS level. So you can point, you have one website address, and then you can point it at potentially one or another different server as well. And we use a system like that for our main site. It's well worth having that potentially on different hosting providers. So the more diversity you have, the less chance that any one of those providers going down would prevent the whole website from operating. Now, the DNS option does have some slight limitations. It can be a little bit slow. If one of the options is down, it takes a little while to think, and it thinks, oh, I've got to head off to a different server. And so there is a little bit of downtime, but yeah, definitely have a backup system running if you can.
Oh, I'm just typing in a question that had happened there. Okay, perfect. Yeah, all right. Well, I think that's kind of, unless you guys have more questions, like, feel free, if you're typing right now, just please like push the raise hand button, and then I know that you're still typing, because yeah, this has been really informative. I kind of want to like do some research on that CRM system, because I feel like somebody said it to me lately.
I've come across a few open source CRMs in the past. I mean, the non-open source alternatives, I guess, you've got products like Salesforce, but again, they have that same sorts of limits that you're tied in with them once you go with them, unless you keep backups of your data. And there may be ways of going and getting data out of there as well with your APIs. So
here's a follow-up question, like where to host the website, e.g. US and New Zealand. Yeah, so we used to have US-based hosting, but we've since decided to shift to New Zealand-based, and that was partly due to our medical system, that people didn't want the data of their private information, private medical data, going out of the country and then coming back in. And there were originally some privacy laws about that. And so we built up New Zealand-based servers. Generally, there's a little bit of lag time. So if you're hosting in New Zealand and you've got a customer coming to you from Europe or from the United States, for example, there will be a slight lag if you've got your servers based in New Zealand. But these days, it's almost unnoticeable. We're talking, I'd say, sort of maximum half a second
lag time that you would see. And once it's made that connection, then it's quite rapid after that. So I don't think it's such a problem these days as perhaps it was earlier on in the web. So we're quite happy with our hosting in a physical office space, that we have a server space there, and we just have a direct internet connection going out. So yeah.
And there's a number of I guess if you wanted to not use something like WordPress, but you wanted to use like a Kiwi website builder, there's a whole bunch of options there, like Rocket Spark, Xero, I think, Website World, Dazzly.
And a lot of these New Zealand-based providers, they'll use open source products in the solution which they offer to their customers as well. So they'll just naturally use them because they're the best solutions around for them to pick up with. And so yeah, a lot of you are probably already on open source servers and so forth, but you may just not be aware of it. But so yeah, generally I would say go with a New Zealand-based provider. It's going to give you that sort of assurity. A, you can talk to them, but B, they can make changes. They're not some big corporate based overseas who you just can't get in touch with.
And then another question, is WordPress.org based in the US?
So to my knowledge, they are. Their core was based in the US. Now, they do have developers all around the world, however. So there are people developing plugins for WordPress. It's quite a large infrastructure, really, because each little plugin that people develop, it adds on functionality to the core of WordPress. So there would probably be in the order of millions of WordPress developers, people who would claim to know how to build WordPress add-ons, plugins, as they're called, and they're based in New Zealand. There will be WordPress developers here too, and they're based all over the world. I think the original organization though was US based, but I'm not 100% certain of that.
And we've had a couple of sessions on WordPress. If you're interested in WordPress, we did like an intro to kind of WordPress, and by two people. We did one with Stealth Digital not too long ago, and we did one quite a while ago with Jesse Siegel from Graphic Monk and Dojo. He's got another company called something like Ninja Dojo or something like that. He's really cool. He's a really cool guy. He did one on video production as well. So yeah, and there's lots of cool other like transparent companies out there in NZ that you can use for different things. Like we had John Ballinger on from GoodSign, and he is really all focusing about transparency in his business, and it's kind of an alternative for small businesses to DocuSign. So it's a really cool thing where you pay like a set rate and that's it, and there's no, you get access to everything. And we did a session with him. It was really great. You should check that out as well. If you're interested in, if that's a part of your business and you need to get documents signed, you might want to have a look.
Yeah, well, I think, it probably is. We don't have a good solution for that at the moment, so I will look.
There you go. Oh, there you go.
You want to send a link through there? I think.
Definitely. And they're doing like some cool stuff with planting trees for, part of their profits that they make, they plant trees because that's like a big mission for him. So yeah, cool stuff. Yeah, there's lots of good stuff out there. I think the more we delve into it, we could probably find lots of options as well. Can you put this reference in the chat too? Yep, I can indeed. I'll pop it in. GoodSign. Yeah, and you can check out, like I said, like you can see everything that they're doing. They're really transparent about everything that's happening there. Digital signatures. Yeah, so Peter, this has been absolutely wonderful because I think we don't talk, we haven't done a chat like this before, and I'm so glad that you brought it to my attention and that you really wanted to do this chat with us and kind of get some more information out there to small businesses, because there are options. Like we don't always have to go with, the big kind of tech giants. There are other solutions that will work for us. And and so I've found this to be really valuable, and I'm sure all of our digital boosters on different channels are finding it really valuable as well. And
Yeah,
I
well,
think that I'm just going to do one more sweep of the chats and just make sure I haven't missed anybody's voice, because I would hate for somebody to have a question and have it not get answered. I'll just be 1 sec as I drop that in the chat. And then I think if nobody else has any other questions, we'll finish up for the day. And
no problem. Oh, I'm glad to be able to bring it to people's attention. It's yeah, it's an area which, you know, we close to our heart, I guess you'd say. So
yeah.
But yeah, it doesn't just affect our own business. It's something which other businesses can pick up on as well.
Yeah, cool. All right, everything's all set. We're all good. So that's it for us today. Thank you, Peter, for joining us today. What a pleasure. Thanks, everyone, for your great questions. They're fantastic. It always makes this session a little bit more rich when we get questions in there, because we want to know what questions you have and get them answered. That's why the experts are here. Thanks, Warren, for saying thanks. That's so sweet.
Thanks,
we always like to thank our hosts. Oh, yeah. Can they please contact you, Peter? Are people, can people contact you?
Yeah, so AtomJump.org, it's probably the best place to get in touch with me.
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, just use the usual company contact and it will get through to me.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Awesome. Great. Thanks, guys. Have a great day. Ka kite, everyone. I'll see you on Monday. Oh, and as I always do, I'll let you know what we have in store for you on Monday. We're going to be doing the ultimate MailChimp template and how to use it. So there we go. Back to non-open source. But it is important. We are talking a lot about email marketing because of all the algorithm changes and stuff like that, if you are using a lot of those platforms. So thanks, Peter. Have a wonderful day.